John Brown's body lies a-mouldering in the grave, while weep the sons of bondage whom he ventured all to save. But though he sleeps, his life was lost while struggling for the slave. His soul is marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory,
Welcome
glory, hallelujah.
to War of the Rebellion, Stories of the Civil War. I am your host, Leon, and this is a reading of the history, Reminiscences of the 19th Massachusetts Regiment by Captain John G.B. Adams. Chapter 7. Battles of Fredericksburg and Marye's Heights. We continued the march through the valley to Warrenton, where General McClellan was relieved of the command of the army and General Burnside succeeded him. Nearly all the men were sad at the loss of McClellan. He was our first love, and the men were loyal and devoted to him. I did not share in this sorrow. My faith had become shaken when we retreated from before Richmond, and when he allowed Lee's army to get away from Antietam. I was disgusted and glad to see a change. Sad as the army felt at the loss of McClellan, they were loyal to the cause for which they had enlisted, and followed their new commander as faithfully as they had the old. We arrived at Falmouth about the middle of November, and went into camp 2 miles from the town. Here we spent our second Thanksgiving. No dance for the officers this year. We had a dinner of hardtack and salt pork, and should have passed a miserable day had not the commissary arrived with a supply of Poland water, and the officers were given a canteen each. The men had the pleasure of hearing our sweet voices in songs of praise from the home of the fallen, as our tent was called. We remained undisturbed until the morning of December 11th, when we were ordered to the banks of the Rappahannock River, opposite Fredericksburg. Here we found a pontoon bridge partially laid, and the engineers doing their best to complete it. Our batteries were posted on the hills in rear of our line, and were vigorously shelling the city. But the rebel sharpshooters were posted in cellars and rifle pits on the other side, and would pick off the engineers as fast as they showed themselves at work. At last, volunteers were called for by Colonel Hall, commanding the brigade, and the 19th Massachusetts and 7th Michigan volunteered. We took the pontoon boats from the wagons, carried them to the river, and as soon as they touched the water, filled them with men. 2 or 3 boats started at the same time, and the sharpshooters opened a terrible fire. Men fell in the water and in the boats. Lieutenant Colonel Baxter of the 7th Michigan was shot when halfway across. Henry E. Palmer of Company C was shot in the foot as he was stepping into the boat. Yet we pressed on, and at last landed on the other side. As soon as the boats touched the shore, we formed by companies, and, without waiting for regimental formation, charged up the street. On reaching the main street, we found that the fire came from houses in front and rear. Company B lost 10 men out of 30 in less than 5 minutes. Other companies suffered nearly the same. We were forced to fall back to the river, deploy as skirmishers, and reach the main street through the yards and houses. As we fell back, we left one of our men wounded in the street. His name was Redding, of Company D. And when we again reached the street, we found him dead, the rebels having bayoneted him in 7 places. The regiment was commanded by Captain H.G.O. Weymouth, Colonel Devereux being very sick in camp. Captain Weymouth went from right to left of the line, giving instructions and urging the men forward. My squad was composed of men from Companies I and A. We had reached a gate, and were doing our best to cross the street. I had lost 3 men when Captain Weymouth came up. "Can't you go forward, Lieutenant Adams?" he said. My reply was, "It is mighty hot, Captain." He said, "I guess you can," and started to go through the gate, when as much as a barrel of bullets came at him. He turned and said, "It is quite warm, Lieutenant. Go up through the house." We then entered the back door and passed upstairs to the front. Gilman Nichols of Company A was in advance. He found the door locked, and burst it open with the butt of his musket. The moment it opened, he fell dead, shot from a house on the other side of the street. Several others were wounded, but we held the house until dark, firing at a head whenever we saw one on the other side. As night came on, we advanced across the street, and the rebels retired. We posted our pickets and went into the houses for rest and observation. The house my company now owned was formerly occupied by a namesake of mine, a music teacher. I left the men downstairs while I retired. The room I selected was the chamber belonging to a young lady. Her garments were in the press, and the little finery she possessed was scattered about the room. Fearing she might return, I did not undress, but went to bed with my boots on. I was soon lost in peaceful slumber, when a sergeant came and said I was wanted below. Going to the kitchen, I found the boys had a banquet spread for me. There was roast duck, biscuit, all kinds of preserves, spread upon a table set with the best china. We were company, and the best was none too good for us. After supper, we went upstairs, and the men were assigned themselves to rooms. In our investigation, we had found a barrel filled with molasses. Every one must fill his canteen, as he filled it from the faucet it ran over, and the house was molasses from cellar to attic. I opened a trunk in my room and found packages of paper. Thinking they might be bonds or stock, I put them in my haversack. The next day, I found they were unpaid bills of the music teacher. Going out on the street, we found it quite lively. One of the boys would come along with a lady on his arm, but upon inspection, it proved to be another soldier, with borrowed clothes. Since we left Rockville, I have not mentioned Ben Falls. He had been on every march and in every battle, and had his musket shot from his shoulder at Glendale, but picked up another and went in again. While at Falmouth, Captain Boyd, who was now in command of Company A, made Ben a cook, because, as he informed me, he wanted him to live to go home. While we were in Fredericksburg, Ben and another man came over, bringing 2 kettles of coffee on poles. Halting before Captain Boyd, he said, "Captain, if you have no use for Ben Falls, send me home. How nice it will look when I write to my wife in Lynn that the regiment fought nobly, and I carried the kettles. I either want a musket or a discharge, and prefer the musket." Captain Boyd granted his request, and it was the last of Ben as a pot slewer. The next day we remained in the city, awaiting orders. We buried our dead, sent the wounded back to the hospital, and made ready for the battle which we knew must come. On the morning of the 13th, we received orders to advance, and marched up the street towards Marye's Heights by the flank. Shot and shell plowed through our ranks, but we filed into a field and were ordered forward to storm the heights. It was necessary, to move up an embankment, then charge over an open field. A rebel battery on our right had a raking fire on us. But we must go forward. Led by our gallant Captain Weymouth, we moved up the bank. The two color-bearers, Sergeant Creasy and Sergeant Rappel, were the first to fall, but the colors did not touch the ground before they were up and going forward. Captain Weymouth fell, shot in the leg, which was afterwards amputated. Captain Mahoney took command of the regiment, and he was also seen to fall, shot in the arm and side. Down went the color-bearers again. Lieutenant Newcomb grasped one, a color corporal another. Newcomb fell, shot through both legs, and as he went down he handed the color to me. Next fell the color corporal, and the flag he held was grasped by Sergeant Merrill, who was soon wounded. Another seized the color, but he was shot immediately, and as it fell from his hands, the officer who already had one caught it. By obliquing to the left, followed by the regiment, we got out of the line of fire for a time and lay down. I do not mention this fact to show that I was braver than other men, for every man of the old regiment on the field would have done the same had opportunity offered. But my services were recognized by promotion to first lieutenant, and I was afterwards given a Medal of Honor by Congress for the act. Looking back over the field, we saw the ground covered with our dead and wounded. Captain Plimpton was now in command of the regiment, and we waited for darkness to bring in our wounded. Late in the evening we withdrew to the city, where we remained the next day. At night, we were ordered to the front. No man was allowed to speak. Dippers must not rattle against bayonets, but all must be still as the dead who slept near us. We remained until nearly daylight, found the army was being withdrawn to the other side of the river, and as usual we were to cover the retreat. We recrossed in safety, and waited on the other side until the pontoons were withdrawn. About half of those who went over never marched back. In the Battle of the 13th, out of less than 300 men we lost in killed and wounded 104. Of the 11 men who carried the colors that day, 8 were killed. I do not believe we killed 5 of the enemy, if we did 1. We found them strongly entrenched, charged upon them, and they mowed us down. Here, the rebels lost an opportunity. Had they attacked us while we were recrossing the river, they could have captured a large part of the army. But they did not see the chance, and we escaped. Sad and weary, we marched back to our old camp. We had become accustomed to defeat. We knew that no braver army stood upon the earth than the Army of the Potomac. But fate had been against us from the start. We saw our numbers growing less, and no real victory to reward us for the sacrifice. It only required a few days after returning to camp to reorganize the regiment. Promotions were made to fill the vacant places, and active drill was resumed. We took up skirmish drill and bayonet exercise in earnest, and what spare time we had stockaded our tents, expecting to remain until spring. But in army life, there is no assurance that you will find yourself in the morning where you lay down at night, and in a few days the army was ordered to pack up. As soon as the order was given, it began to rain, and continued several days. We wallowed around in the mud, trying to march, but it was impossible, and all were ordered back to camp, after suffering untold misery for 2 days. Our next move was to break camp, and locate nearer the town. Here, we stockaded our tents, and were comfortable. Were it not for the sadness felt by reason of the vacant places in our ranks, it would have been the happiest winter I had ever passed. Every night the officers would gather in the adjutant's tent, which was a Sibley, stockaded some 6 feet from the ground, and there hold regular campfires. Stories would be told, songs sung, and recitations given. We had our orators and our poets. I remember one night, when seated around the campfire, the quartermaster Tom Winthrop, who had enlisted as a private with me in Old Company A, read the following tribute to the boys who had gone on. Our fallen braves. Not in the quiet churchyard, where their fathers' bones repose, with loving hands to mark the spot with willow and with rose. Not in the quiet nooks and dells of the old homestead place. Mid scenes of boyhood days time never can efface. But in strange lands we laid them down, in rough-dug soldiers' graves. And far from home and kindred ones they sleep, our fallen braves. No mother's wail of sorrow o'er the new sod fresh and green, where sleeps the boy she nursed and loved and fondled when a wean. No blue-eyed maiden, golden-haired to drop the bitter tear, or mark the spot with loving hands where sleeps the form so dear. But comrades knew their honest worth, the sacrifice they made, and they have marked with thoughtful care where sleep our fallen braves. We left our heroes at Fair Oaks, we dug their honored graves, beside the Chickahominy, with its dull, dreary waves. Not alone they fell in battle, not alone by steel and lead. The fell of malaria swept them off, as fruits fall, ripe and red. And where the southern laurels bloom and olanders wave, in the swamplands drear and deadly, they sleep, our fallen braves. And oh, it was a fearful lot we buried at Glendale. Our ranks were thinned like standing corn before the sweeping gale, and thick their honored graves were strewn through cornfields one by one. They mark the spot where Antietam was bravely fought and won, and where the fight raged fiercest by the Rappahannock's waves. There is many a yellow mound to tell where sleep our fallen braves. O brave hearts, that know no shrinking, O strong hands tried and true, you paled to see your country's stars turn from their azured blue, and burned your hearts with patriot fire, nerved your arm to right. Ye were foremost when the call came, ye were foremost in the fight. And well ye fought, and brave ye died. Ye were no hireling slaves. May earth its richest tribute bring to all our fallen braves. What though no marble monument, no towering shaft of stone, is reared above the sacred soil where rest their honored bones? What though no graven tablet shall, through all the coming time, tell to the world heroic deeds of sacrifice sublime? But we know who, how willingly their noble lives they gave, will treasure in our hearts the worth of all our fallen braves. I do not believe there was a regiment in either army where the love was so strong between officers and men as in the old 19th. We had no little jealousies. The men obeyed the officers because they knew that no unreasonable orders would be given. all was peace and harmony. Officers and men were given furloughs, and boxes were received from home. Some of the boxes had been a long time on the road, and when they arrived, the contents were in an uncertain condition. It was hard to tell the tobacco from the mince pie. William A. Hill, adjutant of the regiment, had expected a box for some time, and the officers knew that when it came to Billy, would see that all had a share. At last it arrived, and we gathered at headquarters to see it opened. The cover was removed, and the smell was not quite equal to the arbutus. But we hoped it was only the top. Another box was found inside, containing what was once a turkey, but was now a large lump of blue mold. Nothing in the box was eatable. We held a council and concluded that a turkey that had been dead so long should have a decent burial. The next day, the remains lay in state while we prepared for the last sad services. We waked the corpse until midnight. Then the sad procession was formed. First came the largest Negro, selected from the many servants, as drum major. Then the comb band. Next the quartermaster, with the carbine reversed, as a firing party. Then the corpse borne on a stretcher by 4 Negroes, 2 small and 2 large. Then the mourners, officers who had expected to eat the turkey, and were left. All so disguised that none could recognize them. We marched down the main street of the camp, the comb band playing the Dead March. Men half-dressed came out of their tents to see what was the trouble. But we passed beyond the camp lines, where a grave had been prepared. Here, the body was lowered. Remarks were made by the chaplain pro tem. A poem was read by the quartermaster, and we returned to camp and mourned for the spirits that had departed. Another jolly time I recall. One day, a light snow had fallen, and the men began to snowball, and the men began to snowball. Soon, companies were engaged, and then the right and left wings of the regiment were pitted against each other. I was with the left wing, and we were holding our own when the drum corps reinforced the right. Up to this time, headquarters had been spectators, but they became excited and joined the right wing. With such reinforcements, the battle would soon be lost to us. But I remembered that some 20 of our Negro servants were in the rear of the hospital tent, and I went to them and offered bounty if they would enlist. They hesitated, but I assured them that I would stand the blame if they joined our forces. Having loaded every one with an armful of snowballs, I charged over the hill and attacked headquarters by the flank. If anyone doubts the bravery of colored troops, he should have seen my army that day. They rushed upon the foe, regardless of who it was. Their ammunition exhausted, they started on the charge, with heads down, and butted all before them. Headquarters vanished, the right wing gave way, and the left held the field. It was the first battle won by colored troops in the war, and it proved that they could fight if well officered. Many of the soldiers quartered near us, and some of our own men, had an eye to business, and were going about the camp selling pies, cookies, and other articles of food. The 19th Maine had many men engaged in this business. One day a tall, honest-looking fellow was going through our camp, when he passed Sergeant McGinnis. "What do you ask for pies?" said McGinnis. 25 cents, replied the soldier. "I won't give it," said McGinnis. "Your colonel was just through here selling them for 20 cents. While at this camp, Colonel Devereux was called home, and we were without a field officer. Captain Mahoney, hearing of this, felt it is his duty to return. Although on leave of absence from the severe wound received at Fredericksburg, he reported for duty. As I have before said, Captain Mahoney was a true son of Erin, brave and patriotic, yet a little peculiar. He brought with him 24 bottles of ginger ale, and at night the officers in full uniform called to pay their respects. We were royally received. Corks were drawn, and sociability began. We informed the captain that the regiment was delighted to have him return, that we had not had a battalion drill for several weeks and were very rusty. He asked what in our opinion we were the most efficient in, and we said the charge. He said he had expected as much, and that the next day we should have a drill. The next day drill call was sounded, and we fell in. All the officers' horses were away except an old one that was called Palmer's Woodbox. Mounted on this, Captain Mahoney took command, and we marched to the parade ground near the town. As the drill was a new thing, the Negro women and children assembled to witness it. We started forward in line. The order double quick was given. Then, charge. On we went. The old horse began to wheel and kick, and the center of the regiment could not pass. Lieutenant Ephraim Hall was in command of the left company and I the right. Captain Mahoney cried, "Halt! Halt!" but we did not hear him, and kept on driving the Negroes into the town. After we had cleared the field, we came marching back. The captain had dismounted and was walking up and down the line mad way through. "Why didn't you halt, Lieutenant Adams?" "Didn't hear you, sir." "Why didn't you halt, Lieutenant Hall?" "Didn't hear you, sir." "Damned lie! Consider yourself in arrest. Adjutant, take Lieutenant Hall's sword." Ephraim was a lieutenant, and Captain Mahoney's company, and while I got off without a reprimand, he must be punished. We marched back to quarters and at night called on the captain with a petition for Lieutenant Hall's release. We were well received. The ginger ale was opened, and after much discussion it was thought best to send for Lieutenant Hall and have matters explained. Captain Mahoney forgave him, although I'm not quite sure Ephraim asked him to do so. But the noble old captain's heart was so large that he never treasured up anything against us. While in camp at Falmouth, the baseball fever broke out. It was the old-fashioned game, where a man running the bases must be hit by the ball to be declared out. It started with the men, then the officers began to play, and finally the 19th challenged the 7th Michigan to play for $60 a side. Captain Hume and myself were the committee of our regiment, with 2 officers from the 7th Michigan, the 4 to select 2 from some other regiment in the brigade. The game was played and witnessed by nearly all of our division, and the 19th won. The $120 was spent for a supper, both clubs being present with our committee as guests. It was a grand time, and all agreed that it was nicer to play base than mini-ball. What were the rebels doing all this time? Just the same as we were. While each army posted a picket along the river, they never fired a shot. We would sit on the bank and watch their games, and the distance was so short we could understand every movement and would applaud good plays. Our men and theirs met in the river and exchanged papers, tobacco, and coffee, and were on the best of terms. As the spring months came, they fished the river for shad, and as they drew, their signs would come so near our shore that they could and often did throw fish to our boys. This truce lasted from January to May 1863, and to both armies was one long, happy holiday. In April I received 10 days' leave of absence and visited my old home. I had been promoted first lieutenant after the Battle of Fredericksburg and wore my new uniform for the first time. After 2 days spent on the road, I arrived in Groveland. As in the field, I found death had been busy. My father had been called home, and many others had passed away. The second night after my arrival, a delegation of citizens waited upon me and escorted me to the vestry, used as a town hall, where I was given a public reception. I do not know what the feelings of General Grant were when he landed at California and was given the grand reception after his trip around the world. But if he felt better than I did, he must have been very happy. I remained at home 6 days, and at the expiration of my leave reported back to the camp. I was as pleased to meet the dear old boys as I had been to meet friends at home. How I love to linger, living over in memory those happy days. I could fill pages with reminiscence of that winter. The horse show, February 22nd. The grand inauguration of Lieutenant Shackley when he received his commission. The blackberry jam at the sutler's tent. The court-martial in the Sibley tent on the hill. And last but not least, the grand joke, which was enjoyed by all. But it would be of interest only to the comrades of the old 19th, and I will pass on to the stern realities of war. Chapter 8. Battles of Chancellorsville, Thoroughfare Gap, and Gettysburg. Wounded at Gettysburg and ordered home. Which will be next week's episode. Should be very exciting. I've got a lot of show notes for this episode, so let's dive right into it. He mentioned Poland water, and I went and looked it up. It was a commercial sale of spring water that started in 1859, so it seems like him and his boys were getting the good stuff. And the fact that they named their officer's tent the Home of the Fallen, whew, man, one heck of a name. And, of course, the Battle of Fredericksburg was a bloodbath. And how could it not be? It's very interesting to hear it from his point of view, with being in part of the battle to cross the river and then work their way through the city. And seems like he's just describing urban warfare, which is bullets come from every direction. So, all right. Anyway, for the record, if I had found one of my fellow Marines bayoneted by rebels here in the States 7 times, I'd commit a list of war crimes so long that they would be talking about me for the next 150 years instead of General Sherman. Because it's, nope. You're going to get the same treatment that you dish out. That's, I don't think people understand that. All right. As far as, so he briefly mentions it, which is when he's walking through Fredericksburg, that he sees a soldier with a woman, and then he looks closer and it's actually just a soldier dressed up as a woman. This is a time-honored tradition from as far back as we have record of soldiers. I can fondly think of World War II, of some great examples, all the way to Afghanistan, which is why I think some of the laws that some dingleberries for politicians who think real men need to be gruff and manly all the time, and are either trying to pass or have passed laws, like in Texas and Florida, which clearly and easily violate the First Amendment because of our right to freedom of expression, is so pointed out in an example like this. So I remember, after a beautiful week-long trip in Phuket, Thailand, on the 15th Mu, I was on the USS Dubuque. I was going for chow, and I had to pass through a series of different berthings to get up to the chow hall. And the very last berthing, and kind of the one that was the center point for the left, or for the port side of the ship, don't get mad at me, sailors. If you wanted to go back to the engine room or through any of the other berthings or storage, you had to go through this one berthing. And that is where the tankers lived. Now, not water tankers, we're talking M1, A1, Abram tank crews. At least all of the enlisted personnel, who as a whole bought high heels, short skirts, wigs, and tight tops, turned off the lights except for a single rotating light-up disco ball that was hanging from the top, and had music blasting, I think it was Lady Gaga, and tried to seduce every single man who walked through their berthing to get to chow, which was darn near everybody in my company. So I will take that special memory of those morons to my grave. I'll never forget a sergeant in a blonde wig twerking on a table. And this was back in 2008 when Bush was still president. So, and I have been to nightclubs, gay nightclubs in Seattle that were still less gay than the Marine Corps. And I just don't know how to tell people. I frequently say that if Congress really knew what the military was like, they wouldn't fund it anymore. All right. Anyway, that's how I know when people complain about men dressing as women, saying it's unmanly or whatever dumb excuse they can come up with. They have no idea what they're talking about or what makes someone a man or manly. All right. Now, moving on here, our illustrious captain taking a stack of papers and thinking that they might be worth something. We've seen that before with the 155th. It was the Irishman, I forget his name, but he grabbed a whole bunch of them that were completely worthless. And he was trying to say he would run off to Ireland with it. But of course, they both find out that their stacks of papers are completely worthless, which was super entertaining. Also, Captain Adams casually drops that he is a Medal of Honor recipient. So let's read his citation, of course. Second Lieutenant, Company I, 19th Massachusetts Infantry, awarded as the date and place at Fredericksburg, Virginia, December 13th, 1862. He was born in Groveland, Massachusetts, and the date of issue is December 16th, 1896. And his citation reads, seized the colors from the hands of a corporal and a lieutenant as they fell mortally wounded, and with a color in each hand advanced across the field to a point where the regiment was reformed on those colors. Which otherwise, during the charge of Marye's Heights, when everyone else, I think he said like 8 people got shot trying to pick up the colors, he grabs both of them like a total Chad and stands there under fire so the regiment could reform on him carrying both flags, which would look amazing in a movie. So, and he just casually mentions it too, and it gets a single sentence in his history here that he's writing, and he's really writing about, his company and his regiment. He just casually mentions his own. Oh my goodness. These guys, I'm telling you what. All right. Also, the memories he recalls about being in camp, this is after Fredericksburg, and the snowball fight and the turkey burial are hilarious. His resourcefulness in recruiting new troops to his cause is pretty great. But those stories that he only names but doesn't actually say what they were, could you imagine 40 years from now, I write a memoir, and then 100 years later, people read it, and then I only casually mention the great USS Dubuque tanker twerking as something that we all remember, but don't worry, you guys would find it boring. And that's it. It's like, you're killing me, Smalls. I want to know how you ate your hardtack. Dry, wet, crushed. What was the grand joke? And what was the jam at the sutler's tent? Like, I want to know what those stories are. Oh my goodness. All right. And of course, we get another dedicated poem out of these guys in this episode. Just absolutely fantastic and well deserving. It's Americana at its best at this time frame. And I wish that we could still write like that today, but, All right. Well, my friends, thanks for listening. This is going to be the end of our episode. I hope you found it entertaining, and I will see you in the next episode. If you want, like and support the podcast, like it or favorite it or star it on whatever you listen on. And of course, down in the show notes will be all of the information that you can support. I will see you in the next one. Stay safe and have a great weekend. Bye.
Old John Brown's body lies a-mouldering in the grave, while weep the sons of bondage whom he ventured all to save. But though he sleeps, his life was lost while struggling for the slave. His soul is marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. For his soul is marching on. John Brown was a hero, undaunted, true, and brave. And Kansas knew his valor when he fought her rights to save. And now, though the grass grows green above his grave, his soul is marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Hallelujah, for his soul is marching on. He captured Harper's Ferry with his 19 men so few, and frightened old Virginia till she trembled through and through. They hung him for a traitor, themselves a traitorous crew, but his soul is marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. For his soul is marching on. John Brown was John the Baptist, of the Christ we are to see. Christ who of the bondman shall the liberator be. And soon throughout the sunny South the slaves shall all be free, for his soul is marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Hallelujah, for his soul is marching on. The conflict that he heralded, he looked from heaven to view on the army of the Union with its flag red, white, and blue. And heaven shall sing with anthems o'er the deed they mean to do, for his soul is marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. For his soul is marching on. Soldiers of freedom, then strike while strike ye may, the death blow of oppression in a better time and way. The dawn of old John Brown has brightened into day, and his soul is marching on.